Hello everybody. In this video I want to show you how to provision a new environment as well as a new key and also a helpful function of figuring out what environment a specific key belongs to. So just a quick overview. In Poly there's multiple levels of hierarchy. So there's an instance which represents an actual installment or deployment of Poly, and within the instance you can have multiple tenants, and within each tenant you can have multiple environments, and then every environment can have multiple keys and multiple users. The key thing to note about an environment is that everything's shared within an environment, so every user has the right to access the same content within the environment. However, they might have different permissions on that content, and I'll explain that as I go through this demo. So generally you would want to create a new environment for potentially things like, development, testing, production, for different projects. But you could use an environment kind of like a tenancy if you wanted to have different partners have different content inside those environments. So for example, if you were building integrations for different customers or different partners, and they were going to participate in the development of those integrations, you could have separate environments with separate keys to access those environments, and therefore each customer would have effectively their own tenant. Now you could also create a whole new tenant on a per customer basis, where you basically have whole sets of users with whole sets of environments in it. So you have a lot of choice there, but my recommendation would always be to kind of start with the lowest assumption. So assume everyone could be in the same environment unless there's a reason to do another environment. Assume everyone could be in the same tenant unless there's a reason to do another tenant. And then same thing with instances. Assume you could share one instance for all your projects unless there's reasons to have separate instances. And those are going to be very customer specific. So I don't want to get stuck on kind of explaining all the nuances of those at this moment. So let's start off by assuming that we wanted to create a new environment. So here you basically have an endpoint, and you do need an admin key to be able to create a new environment within a tenant. So tenant admins have the right to create environments, and instance admins have the right to create tenants. So the only thing you really need for an environment is to give it a name. So I just said, environment for customer X. Let's say we'll be collaborating together. I'm going to invite the customers to participate, and therefore I want to have an isolated environment for this customer. So here I'll hit send, and we could see that a new environment was created. We could see that an ID was issued for that environment. We could see that its initial logging state is false, meaning that as custom functions are deployed to this environment, they're implicitly set to logging off. And then we could also see that the subdomain for this environment is a generated ID, and this is necessary when you're using webhooks or when you're using our plugins. You'll see that the subdomain appears in different places. So now let's go ahead and create a key. Now for the purposes of my demos that you've seen, I decided to just keep it to one environment. So I won't actually be creating the key in that environment that we just created. I just wanted to demonstrate what it looks like. And then you basically specify just the environment ID here, and then /API keys. And here again, you have to be an admin with the permission to create keys. And here for this user who I assign by ID, I get to basically specify the permissions that they would have. There's also an endpoint for you to find users. I'm going to omit that in this video and assume that you could figure it out from our OpenAPI specification. But you basically assign a key to a user. You can name the key. You can have multiple keys, and then those keys can have different permissions. And it's generally best practice to give the least amount of permissions. You can always patch a key to add additional permissions as well. And once you create a key, you will only see the actual key once, and then in the future, when you look at this key, you'll see all the other details, but you won't see the key value itself. So this is our key. We could now issue it to a partner, a customer, an internal user, and they can run with it, and basically they would have these permissions in this environment of Poly. Now one other helpful little function to note is I'll go ahead and grab this key here, and then I'll go ahead and just go to the /whoami endpoint. And here you can basically paste the key and hit send. And you'll notice that this will give you a user ID, tenant ID, environment ID, and environment subdomain. So this is helpful information if you ever have a key and you forget what environment it's for, or you want to just double check. You have the ability to call this endpoint and kind of see the hierarchy of this key to understand to whom it belongs, in which environment, and which tenant. With that, thank you so much for watching.